I'm hopping on because it's my few minutes of opportunity to do this because I'm driving home and then I'm not going to be able to. So, just leaving my mark on the recording. I don't really have anything to say.
New Orleans in June, the air is heavy with sex and death. Not violent death, but death by decay, over-ripeness, rotting, death by drowning, suffocation, fever of unknown ideology. The place is physically dark, dark like the negative of a photograph, dark like an X-ray. The atmosphere absorbs its own light, never reflects light but sucks it in until random objects glow with a morbid luminescence. The crypts above ground dominate certain vistas. In the hypnotic liquidity of the atmosphere, all motion slows into choreography. All people in the street move as if suspended in a precarious emulsion, and there seems only a technical distinction between the quick and the dead. One afternoon on St. Charles Avenue, I saw a woman die, fall forward over the wheel of her car. Dead? Pronounced an old woman who stood with me on the sidewalk a few inches from where the car had veered into a tree. As the police ambulance came, I followed the old woman through the aqueous light of the Pontchartrain Hotel garage and into the coffee shop. The death had seemed serious but casual, as if it had taken place in a pre-Columbian city where death was expected and did not in the long run count for much. Whose fault is it? The old woman was saying to the waitress in the coffee shop, her voice trailing off. It's nobody's fault, Miss Clarice. They can't help it, no. They can't help it all. I had thought they were talking about the death, but they were talking about the weather. Richard used to work at the bureau and he told me, you can't help what comes in on the radar. The waitress paused, as if for emphasis. They simply cannot be held to account. You just can't, the old woman said. It comes in on the radar. The words hung in the air. I swallowed a piece of ice. Did we get it? The old woman said after a while. It was a fatalism I would come to recognize as endemic to the particular tone of New Orleans life. Bananas would rot and harbor tarantulas. Weather would come in on the radar and be bad. Children would take fever and die. Domestic arguments would end in knifings. The construction of highways would lead to graft and cracked pavement where the vines would shoot back. Affairs of state would turn on sexual jealousy. In New Orleans, as if in Port-au-Prince, and all the king's men would turn on the king. The temporality of the place is operatic, childlike, the fatalism that of a culture dominated by wilderness. All we know, said the mother of Carl Austin Weiss, of the son who had just shot and killed Huey Long in the corridor of the Louisiana State Capitol building in Baton Rouge, that he took living very seriously. As it happens, I was taught to cook by someone from Louisiana. or an avid preoccupation with recipes and food among men was not unfamiliar to me. We lived together for some years, and I think we most fully understood each other when once I tried to kill him with a kitchen knife. I remember spending whole days cooking with him, perhaps the most pleasant days we spent together. He taught me to fry chicken and to make a brown rice stuffing for fowl, and to chop endive with garlic and lemon juice, and to lace everything I did with Tabasco and Worcestershire and black pepper. The first present he ever gave me was a garlic press, and also the second, because I broke the first. One day on the Eastern Shore, we spent hours making shrimp bisque and then had an argument about how much salt it needed. Because he'd been drinking Sazeracs for several hours, he poured salt in to make his point. It was like brine, though he pretended it was fine. Frying the chicken on the floor, or the artichoke, buying crab boiled, discussing endlessly the possibilities of an artichoke and oyster casserole. After I married, he still called me up occasionally for recipes. The first time I ever was in the South was in late 1942, early 1943. My father was stationed in Durham, North Carolina, and my mother and brother and I took a series of slow and overcrowded trains to meet him there. Home in California, I had cried at night. I had lost weight. I had wanted my father. I had imagined the Second World War as a punishment specifically designed to deprive me of my father, to counted up my errors and, with an egocentricity which then approached autism and which afflicts me still in dreams and fevers of marriage, found myself guilty. Of the trip, I recall mainly that a sailor who had just been torpedoed on the Wasp in the Pacific gave me a silver and turquoise ring, and that we missed our connection in New Orleans and could get no room. We sat up one night on a covered veranda of the St. Charles Hotel, my brother and I in matching seersucker sunsuits, and my mother in a navy blue and white checked silk dress dusty from the train. She covered us with the mink coat she had bought before her marriage and wore until 1956. We were taking trains instead of driving, because a few weeks before in California she had lent the car to an acquaintance who drove it into a lettuce truck outside Salinas, a fact of which I'm certain, because it remains. But I can only suggest that his presence in the small house, his tension and his aggressive privacy, his preference for shooting craps over eating peach ice cream, must have seemed to me so potentially disruptive as to efface all memory of weekends. On the days of the week which were not Thursday, I played with a set of paper dolls lent me by Mrs. Cottle, dolls bearing the faces of Vivian Leigh, Olivia de Havilland, Anne Rutherford, and Butterfly McQueen as they appeared in Gone with the Wind. And I also learned from the neighborhood to eat raw potatoes in the house. Now being pica is common in the South, just as I know why the driver used to leave the curb until we had moved from the back seat to the front, but I did not know it then. I did not even know then that my mother found her sojourn of some months in Durham less than ideal. The name what impelled me to spend time in the South during the summer of 1970. There was no repertorial imperative to any of the places I went at the time I went. Nothing happened anywhere I was. No celebrated murders, trials, integration orders, confrontations, not even any celebrated acts of God. I had only some dim and unformed sense, a sense which struck me now and then, and which I could not explain coherently, that for some years the South, and particularly the Gulf Coast, had been for America what people were still saying California was, and what California seemed to me not to be, the future, the secret source of malevolent and benevolent energy, the psychic center. I did not much want to talk about this. I had only the most ephemeral picture in my mind. If I talked about it, I could mention only Clay Shaw and Garrison, and the pilot I had once met who flew between the Gulf and unnamed Caribbean and Central American airstrips for several years on small planes with manifests that showed only tropical flowers. I mentioned only some apprehension of paranoia and febrile conspiracy and verbal manipulation and peach ice cream and an unpleasant evening I had spent in 1962 on the eastern shore of Maryland. In short, I could only sound deranged. And so, instead of talking about it, I flew south one day in the summer of 1970, rented a car, and drove for a month or so around Louisiana and Mississippi and Alabama. Saw no spokesman, covered no events, did nothing at all but try to find out, as usual, what was making the picture in my mind. In New Orleans, the old people sitting in front of houses and hotels on St. Charles Avenue, barely rocking. In the quarter, I saw them again, along with desolate long-haired children, sitting on balconies, an ironing board behind them, gently rocking, sometimes not rocking at all, but only staring. In New Orleans, they have mastered the art of the motionless. In the evening, I visited in the Garden District, Ollie Ollie Oxenfree echoing in the soft twilight, around the magnolias and the trees with fluffy pods of pink. What I saw that night was a world so rich and complex, it was almost disoriented. A world complete unto itself, a world of smooth surfaces broken occasionally by a flash of eccentricity so deep it numbed any attempt at interpretation. I guess nobody knows more about the South than the people in this room right now, my host allowed several times before dinner. We were at his house in the Garden District with the requisite bound volumes of the Sewanee and the Southern Review and the requisite Degas portrait of his great-great-grandmother. He was talking about his wife and their friend, an architect of good Mobile family who specialized in the restoration and rebuilding of New Orleans revival houses. And of course he was talking about himself. Ben C, the others called him, voices fondly inflected. Just stop that, Ben C, as he bullied the two women, his sister and his wife working together on a junior league project, a guidebook to New Orleans. Already Ben C had demanded to know what athletics my husband played, why I had been allowed, in the course of doing some reporting a few years before, to spend time consorting with a lot of marijuana-smoking hippie trash. Allowed you, he repeated. I said that I did not quite know what he meant, and Steve only stared at me. I mean, who wouldn't have allowed me? You do have a husband, he said finally. This man I thought was your husband for several years, he is your husband? The evening, it developed, started off not for Ben C. It seemed that he had called some of his cousins to come for dinner, and he had made excuses, and he had found that inexcusable. It further seemed that the excuse made by one cousin, who it would turn out was a well-known Southern writer, a previous engagement with the director of a Head Start program, Ben C had found that particularly inexcusable. What am I meant to conclude, he demanded rhetorically of his wife? Am I meant to conclude he's certifiable? Maybe you're meant to conclude he didn't care to come to dinner, she said. And then, as if to cover her irreverence, she sighed, I only hope he doesn't get too mixed up with them. You know what happened to George Washington Cable? I tried to remember what had happened to George Washington Cable. He ended up having to go north, is what happened. I said that I wanted only to know what people in the South were thinking and doing. He continued to gaze at me. He had the smooth, rounded face of well-off New Orleans, that absence of angularity which characterizes the local genetic pool. I tried to think who had incurred his wrath by going up north and whining. Would just guess that we know a little more about the subject, Ben C said finally, his voice rising, than one Mr. Willie Morris. We ate trout with shallots and mushrooms, drank some white wine, we drank some more bourbon. We passed the evening. I never learned why the specter of one Mr. Willie Morris had materialized in that living room in the Garden District, nor did I ask. C's wife and sister, Mrs. Benjamin C. Toledano and Mrs. Beauregard Redmond, soon to me Mrs. Toledano Redmond, many suggestions for understanding the South. I must walk Bourbon or Royal to Chartres, must walk Chartres to Esplanade, must have coffee and donuts at the Fresh Market, should not miss St. Louis Cathedral, Presbytere, or Quebeldo, should have lunch at Galatoire's, trout almondine or trout marguerite. We should obtain a copy of The Great Days of the Garden District. We should visit Asphodel, Rosedown, Oakley Plantation, Inn Hall and Natchez, the Grand Hotel in Point Clear. We should have dinner at Manilay's, toward Coliseum Square Park. We should appreciate the grace and beauty of their way of life. These graceful preoccupations seem to be regarded by the women in a spirit at once dedicated and merely tolerant, as if they lived their lives on several quite contradictory levels. One afternoon, the Algiers, Akameen Parish. This peculiar country. Algiers is a doubtful emulsion of white frame bungalows and jerry-built apartment complexes, the Park Fontaine apartments and so forth. And the drive on down the river takes you through a landscape more metaphorical than any I have seen outside the Sonoran Desert. Here and there one is conscious of the levee. Off to the left, corn and tomatoes grow aimlessly, as if naturalized. I am too accustomed to agriculture as agribusiness, the rich vistas of the California valleys where all the resources of Standard Oil and the University of California have been brought to bear, ferocity, constant productivity. The hunting of quadrupeds, a sign read in bell shafts. What could that mean? Can you hunt reptiles, bipeds? There are dead dogs by the road, nesting on graveyard, a grove of live oak. Getting close to Port Sulphur, we began to see sulphur works. Tanks glowing oddly in a peculiar light. We ran over 3 snakes in the hour's drive, all of them a thick black mass and already dead, twisted across the one lane. There were rundown antiques places and tomato stands, and a beauty shop called Feminine Fluff. The snakes, the rotting undergrowth, the sulphurous light. Images are so specifically those of the nightmare world that when we stopped for gas or directions, I had to steel myself, deaden every nerve in order to step from the car onto the crushed oyster shells in front of the gas station. To the hotel, I stood at the noon. Then I started thinking about where the water came from, what dark places it had roots in. When I think now about New Orleans, I remember mainly its dense obsessiveness, its vertiginous preoccupation with race, class, heritage, style, and the absence of style. What happens? Particular preoccupations all involve distinction, a frontier ethic that teaches Western children to deny and to leave deliberately unmentioned. In New Orleans, those distinctions are the basis of much conversation, and lend that conversation its peculiar childlike cruelty and innocence. In New Orleans, they also talk about parties and about food, their voices rising and falling, never still, as if talking about anything at all could keep the wilderness at bay. In New Orleans, the wilderness is sensed as very near, not the redemptive wilderness of the Western imagination, but something rank and old and malevolent. The idea of wilderness not as an escape from civilization and its discontents, but as a mortal threat to a community precarious and colonial in its deepest aspect. The effect is lively and avaricious and intensely self-absorbed, a tone not uncommon in colonial cities, but for some reason finds such cities invigorating.
try to make it think that it's right there. When London said, because if you want to live it, but I don't want to speak to it, I don't remember the words, but like that.
Good morning, Vietnam, ladies and girls. Awooga and good night.
I make a plan. Gotta do what's right. And run around in circles. You want a goth wife. I want to make a plan for a day far away. Young and while available, all I want to do is play Valorant on PC in 2021.
Yep. It's going.
Vegan Korean soup, some tears. Better medicine is there. Tears courtesy of Colette, an Oscar-winning short documentary about a former French resistance fighter. Psychic reader coming soon sign. A former Catholic vestment store. 15 girls standing on the metro tracks, filming each other flipping open a switchblade.
It's loud.
During the war, we felt the silence and the policy of the governments of English-speaking countries. That policy was to win the war first, and work out the meanings afterward. The result was, of course, meanings were lost. Muriel Rukeyser. worse visibility. Everywhere we went, I went in pigtails. No one could see. Ribbon curled by a scissor-sharp edge, the bumping our cars undertook when hitting those strips along the interstate to shake us awake. Everywhere we went, horses bucking their riders off, holstered pistols or two Frenchies dancing in black and white in a torn-apart living room. On the big screen, polite cow faces lit softly by new wave cinema I will never get into. A soft whir of continuous strip imagery. What is fascism? A student asked me, and can you believe I couldn't remember the definition? Sonnet, I said. I said this. Sanctioned tuneness. My covert pigtails. Driving to the cinema, you were yelling. This is not yelling, you corrected in the car. Tiny amphitheater. I will resolve this, I thought, and through that resolution, I will be a stronger compatriot. This is fascism. Dinner party by dinner party, waltz by waltz, weddings ringed by admirers, by old couples who will rise to touch each other publicly. In inter-theater traffic, you were yelling, and beside us, briefly, a sheriff's retrofitted bus. Full or empty was impossible to see. Ground visibility. This mangy plot where, by now, only mothers still come. Only mothers guard the nameless dead. And then sparingly, these graves, place of the damned, prison, history stumping ground. Peepholes burnt through the metal doors of their solitary cells, just large enough for 3 fingers to curl out, for a lemon to pass through, for an ear to be held against, for one eye than the other, to regard the hallway, to regard the cell and inmate. Peepholes without a lens. When the guard comes to inspect me, I inspect him. Touch me, you said. And through that opening, I did. Master film. My mother around that blue porcelain. My mother nannying around the boxed grits and just at water pantry of the 3rd richest family in Alabama. My mother at school on Presbyterian dime and me on my great-grandmother's lap singing. Her home, my mother mostly gone. So elsewhere and wondering about my dad, my baba, driving a cab in Poughkeepsie, lifting lumber in Rochester, 30-something and pages of albums killed. Entire rows of classrooms disappeared. My baba downing Bud Light by the Hudson and listening to Fast Car. My baba on VHS, interviewed by a friend from New York, his hair black as mine is now. Before and in Alabama, I see him between odd jobs in different states, and on the video, our friend shows Baba a picture of me and asks, "How do you feel when you see Solmaz?" And Baba saying, "Turn the camera off," and turn off the camera, and then, "Can you please look away? I don't want you to see my Baba cry." vulnerability study. Her face turning from mine to keep from coming. Eat strawberries in a wet blue bowl. Abba holding his pants up at the checkpoint. Newlywed securing her up to with grenade pins. The wall cleared of nails, the ghosts to walk through. Body, which the war has passed. Drink biter. Grown. From where I did not learn to mow down and lock up. From where I wouldn't hear your father must come with me. Where I must fingerprint your grandmother. Can you translate, please? The FBI has my cousin's computers. My father says, say whatever you want over the phone. My father says, don't let them scare you, that's what they want. My mother has a hard time believing anything's bugged. My father and I always talk like the world listens. My father is still on the bus with contraband papers under his seat as uniform stormed down the aisle. It was my job to put a cross on each home with dead for clearing. It was my job to dig graves into the soccer field. I wrote, red tracksuit. I wrote, Shahida headless found beside Stahad Mosque, buried in the same grave as the above. I wrote, unidentified fingers found inside Oldsmobile car. I wrote their epitaphs in chalk. From my son's wedding mattress, I know this mounts his room. I dropped a knee and engaged the enemy. I emptied my clip, then finished the job. I took 2 steps in and threw a grenade. It took no more than 2 steps into a room before firing. Haditha, we cleared homes Fallujah style. My father was reading the Quran when they shot him through the chest. They fired into the closet, the kitchen, 90-year-old, the stove. Just where was I? Una a una tu cara and todos los buses urbanos. Here lie the mortal remains of one who in life searched your face. Call me when you get home. Let's miss an appointment together. Let's miss another flight, repeated strip searches, at Haditha beds with magenta queen sheets and wood-shelved headboards, and blood spattered up the walls to the ceiling. They held each other. They slept on opposing ends, wishing one would leave. The other doesn't know who I am anymore. I write Mustafa Muhammad Khalaf, 15 months old. I write, here lies an unknown martyr, a big security guard with a blue shirt found near an industrial area with chain of martyr unknown, only bones. You ask if I have anything to declare, then limit my response to fruits and nuts. An American interrupts an A and B conversation to tell me, you don't have to do anything you don't want to do. It strikes me as a misstep away from she was asking for it. What did you expect after fishing Popov from a trash bin? What did you expect after accepting a marble palace? Dragged the man who killed my uncle out a hole. The inspector for ticks on national television. No one in my family celebrates. When the FBI knocks, I tell them, I don't have to do anything I don't want to do, and they get a kick out of that. She just laid there and took it like a champ. She was dying for it. At a protest, a man sells a shirt that reads, my dick would pull out of Iraq. My mother tape records my laugh to mail bubble wrapped back home. My mother records me singing, Yeshabe Makab Mamiyad Dukhab. I'm singing The Moon Will Come One Night and Take Me Away side street by side street. Sitting on a pilled suburban carpet or picking blue felt off the hand-me-down couch. The displaced whatnots. Practice the work of worms. How much I can wear away with no one watching. 2 generations ago, my blood moved through borders according to grazing and seasons, in a lifeline of planes. Planes fly so close to my head, filled with omelets and disappeared men. Scaffolding sprouts nooses sagging with my dead. I burn my finger on the broiler in small trenches. My uncle pissing himself. Hopping backs are legs. There's half a head in the gutter. I say hello NSA when I place a call. Some more file details my sexual habits. Some tribunal may read it all back to me. will sort keep. Know the cell they will put me in. Will put me onto a crooked pile of others to rot. This is what happens to a brain born into war. City of broken teeth. That's a fallen. We've learned to sing a child's calling in a bomb shelter. I'm singing to her still.
Happy Green Day, everybody.
Holy
In May, everyone.
Green
Happy Green May.
Happy Green Bay.